Hi, everyone. Welcome to Make Business Better from Quartz. I'm Zach Seward. Slack has transformed how business is conducted inside so many companies. Just here at Quartz, where we started using Slack in early 2014, it has become, quite frankly, the most important connective tissue of our distributed workforce. That knock-knock sound of an arriving message has sort of become synonymous with the daily grind of contemporary office workers. So much so that I see people complain that Slack's television ads on the weekends that include that knock-knock are sort of triggering of the office place. So today we're going to talk about Slack, but not the service, more the company and what it's been like inside that company through its pretty tremendous growth story over the last decade. My guest today, Rayl, has seen that whole decade of history transpire from within the company. She'd been working in software QA when she took a job at a gaming company called Speck. And well, there's a lot more to her biography than that, but I would rather Allie tell it. So let's bring her in. Allie, welcome to Make Business Better. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Good
Thanks so much.
morning.
Yeah, good morning. Appreciate your getting up on the West Coast, sorry, to do this show. So there, I gave you the scantest of introductions. You took a job at Speck. You thought you were working at a gaming company. How long was it until you realized that wasn't what's going to be the day-to-day job?
This is kind of wild. It was a month and a half. So I was the last person in the door at the gaming company before we shut down the game. I started in early October and we decided to shut down the game in mid-November. So it's a really, really short period of time.
Now, this pivot in the history of the company that would be called Slack is sort of, at this point, lore in Silicon Valley. It turned out to be a successful pivot. But yeah, and so it's been told quite a few times to different people. But I want to hear what it was like for you as an employee who I assume was caught totally off guard by the announcement. What like, take us back as much as you remember to like the sequence of emotions when you learn companies shutting down.
Yeah. A lot of my career had been in enterprise software. And in 2008, I was like, and it had all been startups. So I'm a serial startup person. This is my seventh. It doesn't really count as a startup anymore, but whatever. So in 2008, I was like tired of doing enterprise software. And the thing about enterprise is that people don't want what you're doing. Like, your bosses buy it, they put it on your machine. It's usually geared towards like their ROI rather than your experience. And it's just not a very rewarding way to build software. So in 2008, I was like sick of enterprise. Let's go do consumer stuff. And did a, music player startup basically. And then iTunes happened, the iPod happened. That wasn't a job. And I was like, well, I love this video game called Glitch. And they just happened to have a job open that fit my skill set. So I moved over. It's like, cool, I've gotten out of the enterprise hole. Like, we're going to do a video game now. And so then a month and a half later, I was like, this game is not a business. We're going to shut it down and we're going to do workplace communications.
But am I following correctly? You'd sort of been jumping from one failed startup to another. So the idea that one morning you wake up and the whole thing sort of fell apart was not foreign to you.
Oh, no, it was like, when you go from startup to startup, there is a lot of uncertainty. It's hard. It's hard to start a business no matter what industry you're in. And so when it was like, we're doing this pivot, I was okay with that. I was pretty resilient. And the thing that I realized, even though I hadn't been working at the company or with this team for that long, I was like, this is a team that I like to work with. This is a group of people with good ideas that works together really, like in a really productive and healthy way that can get stuff done. And that's just like a good group of people, which is why I said like, yeah, I don't know what we're doing. This isn't what I signed up for, but I'll stick around because I like working with all of you.
Yeah, at that point was how much did you know about what you were signing up for or re-signing up for in what this next phase of the company was going to be? It was about eight of you who were offered jobs.
Yeah, there are 8 of us, 4 co-founders, and then they kept on 4 of us to kind of, fill out the complement of all the things that needed to be done. And as a serial startup person, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, which is why I have always done startups, because you don't get pigeonholed into a single job. You can just kind of, it's kind of chaos. You're always doing stuff that you don't really know how to do. Like, for example, when Slack started growing, we needed to hire somebody who was on an H-1B. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I don't know how to do that, but somebody's got to figure it out. So that's always been really fun to me. So, when we did the pivot, it wasn't entirely clear what I needed to do other than what needed to be done, which to me is always the most thrilling part of startups, which is there are a lot of jobs that are nobody's jobs, and somebody's got to step in and figure it out.
I mentioned earlier this pivot has become larger than life a little bit in Silicon Valley history, and I suppose I'm not doing much to disabuse that notion by talking so much about it. But I wonder, have you thought back to that moment since and drawn lessons from it at other times that Slack has had to, maybe not quite such a dramatic pivot, but where you've had to lead your team in a new direction, or obviously most recently Slack was acquired by Salesforce. I don't know if how disruptive that was internally, but when you look back at that time, what are the lessons that you try to apply to the work today?
So when we did the pivot, like, this outcome was not in our dreams.
You mean being a wildly successful publicly traded company that changes how people communicate?
Not at all.
Okay.
We had built some internal communication software because we were a distributed company. Our game studio was in Vancouver, engineering was in San Francisco, music in Toronto, more engineering in New York. So we had built this internal communications tool just to build a video game. And the thought was, this works for us. We don't want to work at another job without this. Maybe other people would like it. Let's build it and hope that we make enough money that the 8 of us can continue working together on this. And then early on, we had a list of like goal companies. Like, we would feel really good if these companies started using Slack. And like, the major goals were companies like GitHub. It was huge when they started using Slack. Quartz and Slack we're about the same age.
Sure.
I actually do remember when Quartz signed up. Like, Quartz came out of the gate and was pretty visible right away. Like, you didn't, like, I remember you signing up and thinking, like, that's a new media outlet. That's something right there, because you kind of see the potential in that. And I think, kind of rolling back to your question, the lesson from all that is, like, we built what we believed, rather than, doing a lot of market research and saying, like, what are CIOs looking for out of their work communication software? Like, what can the market bear pricing wise? It was much more improvisational. It was much more intuitive. And if you look at, we had 3.5 years, or the company had 3.5 years of very unconsciously building this product. It wasn't targeted towards people, it's targeted towards our needs. So we had this amazing kind of really, generative prototyping process. And there was just a lot of kind of, like, lick your finger, stick it up in the air, see which direction the wind is blowing, as we kind of built it for the market. And we still hold that ethos very strongly today. It's so much of Slack for us is like, how does a person feel about this? How are we helping individual people? And I think that is why people get so attached to the product, and why they actually they don't mind using it at work, because we've thought about them rather than thinking about their CIO and their CIO's needs, kind of first and foremost.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that more, because I totally agree. The most notable difference in starting to use Slack back in 2014 was it had a personality and tone and felt personal, and that helped it easily spread within our company, and then very quickly throughout all of media, and took over a bunch of industries that way. I think I assume today you do get some market research plopped on your desk from time to time, and are studying what companies prefer about competitors' product versus
Mhm.
yours. So things have undoubtedly been vastly more professionalized from that time, and that's
Mhm.
inevitable. They're a bigger
Yep.
company going after different targets. I that always happens. But
Mhm.
I am curious to hear, how do you try to instill the finger in the wind
Mhm.
spirit you were just talking about? Because I think about that a lot. Quartz's trajectory, very different details, but a lot of like our best decisions were gut instinct
Mhm.
calls, not really based on a ton of research. So I don't know. There's a version where you sort of suck the life out of what you're talking about with that professionalism. How do you think about avoiding it?
Um, One of our sayings internally is data informed, not data driven. Like,
Hmm.
data has a place. It's interesting, but it doesn't make all of our decisions for us. Like, we have a lot of autonomy as people to look at the data and say, that's interesting, but I think it's leading us down the wrong path. And this shows up in ways big and small. And I think one of the small ways that kind of makes people go, aha, is the ordering of items in menus. The data driven way is to say, which items do people click on in what order? And therefore, items, 1 through 8 go in order of how you clicked on it. The you know, but the more intuitive thing for us to do is to say, like, how do we logically group items together so that people can say, like, okay, editing a message and deleting a message, those are kind of the same. Sharing a file, like, how do we logically group items to put those together? So we kind of take that ethos all the way from these extremely small interactions kind of to the bigger stuff. I think, another thing to look at, like, think back to when the iPod came out. There are all sorts of MP3 players on the market, and it was like, has an AM FM radio, has, voice recording capability. Like, they had a bunch of bells and whistles. And the iPod was like, it's 1,000 songs, fits in your pocket, and
Hmm.
that was it. And people are like, this product doesn't stand up to what exists in the market. But of course, it totally did. It took over the market because it was simply a better product. So there's
Yeah.
also some restraint that's required for us to say, like, what what works for Slack? Like, not the checklist, not what everybody else does. What works for our product and what our customers need?
I am tempted to jump far ahead in the timeline to today, because I was kind of, as a user, thrilled to see Slack go, well, not private per se, but go under Salesforce in the sense of, like, it just hope it gives like a little more freedom to pursue exactly what you're talking about. Because the biggest challenge I imagine facing the company is you've been sucked back into enterprise. That's the customer serving, and those tools tend to grow and grow, and it's hard to maintain the kind of simplicity you're talking about. But Slack does a pretty good job with it, all things considered, for
Well,
sure.
thank you.
Well, so but before I resist the temptation to go that far and forward in the timeline, and want to um, speed ahead to what felt to you like the next inflection point.
Mhm.
So you started at 8 people. I don't, you'll know better how quickly it grew in terms of employees. Um, you said that, Quartz and Slack are about the same age. That's about where the similarities end. But I do recall that, like, when we got to 150 people at Quartz, that felt like a really important inflection point where existing systems and processes kind of fell apart and had to be
Mhm.
rebuilt entirely. I don't know. It's our former CEO who made 150, pointed 150 as the inflection point. I don't know if that is scientifically correct, but did the Slack have a moment like that where you sort of turn around and feel like, oh, like we need to rebuild a new kind of company for this kind of growth?
I think that that's one of the sort of unfortunate things that we don't talk about enough, which is things break all the time in a growing company.
Hmm.
So one thing that we figured out pretty early on, as the growth just kind of happened and we were sprinting all the time to keep up for like years, is don't don't make everything too robust. So build a process that'll last you for the next year, because it's going to break within the next year. You're going to have to rebuild it. If you invested too much in it, you're going to be really sad that it doesn't work anymore. You're going to be much more reticent to overhaul it. But if you build it and you're like, yeah, good enough to get us through a year, and you kind of have that, I don't know, the amortization built in terms of your own effort and how much you're attached to your work, it's much easier to say, it was going to break, it broke, let's do another round. So there are a ton of inflection points that happened. There was, I'd say, probably in the like 60 to 80 people realm. I think there's another one around 150. There's another one around 500. And those all kind of coincided with office moves as well. And it was, there's kind of like, there are neat delineations in, how quickly we grew and how unprepared our processes and our systems were to handle that growth. And, over the last, I'd say 3 years, we got to the scale where it's like, okay, we can now truly, truly build for the future. Like, let's build that ERP system that takes us to, like the $5 billion company. But in terms of things like onboarding, documentation, how you log bugs, all that, like it just breaks all the time.
You mean you felt like we're always catching up until at least 2 or 3 years ago. What is it that changed 2 or 3 years ago that led to that sort of graduation to it? I guess, does that felt like a more mature company at that point? Like what made the difference?
Yeah, we just became a more mature company. It was, in the couple of years leading up to going public, we were in like public preparedness. And it wasn't like, we're imminently going public or anything. It was just, it is a good business practice to run like this. So let's solidify our systems and our processes so that we could theoretically flip the switch any day. And I think that sort of stuff is not fun, but that rigor is really healthy for kind of getting you over that hump to say, like, we're no longer scrappy. We're no longer just kind of sprinting to catch up. Like, now we are in a place where we can build for the future in a lot of ways, which isn't to say everything like onboarding still breaks. Like, we still have to redo onboarding all the time.
Got it. Well, let's go back to getting over some of those inflection points, because well, for one, are there any Slack features that are now for public use that kind of came out of internal need as the company was growing?
We have like, for the first few years, we were really good at building a product for exactly the size of company that Slack was.
Right.
So you kind of saw like more features get introduced as our own growth and our own company size made us understand, like, oh, we need this.
Compliance.
Also simple things like sidebar sections. As we got more people in the company, and that resulted in more channels and more projects running, people said, like, I need a way to organize this. And so sidebar sections came about. And it's not that we hadn't heard it from our customers, but we didn't understand it well enough to build it until we experienced it ourselves. This is something that we are getting increasingly good at over time, which is, how do we build things that we don't need? Which, like, not everybody is a software company, not everybody is our size. And it's that has been another muscle that we've had to build, which is, what do we build that we don't use? And how do we make that great?
It's a really interesting challenge for all enterprise software companies that especially those that had their growth in the similar way as Slack, or it's like early adopters championing it within their company, but then just go to scale and everyone in the company needs to use it, and the requirements sort of become different. It's sort of a microcosm of that. So, well, I mean, kind of the story you're telling is obviously this evolution from 8-person startup to a mature and public company. Did you know at the time when that shift was happening? Like, did you stop building for yourselves and shift the focus to building for other types of customers' needs, or start professionalizing decisions so
Mhm.
that they weren't always as just a gut feeling, or is it only in retrospect that you could identify that shift?
No, at the time, so in 2016, when we launched our enterprise grid product,
Mm,
we were not a company that needed enterprise grid's features. We didn't need like the robustness of organization or all the compliance stuff, but we're like, other people need that, so we've got to do it. And it's not just, the product, but how we engage with the market, how we talk to those customers, and kind of our understanding of the landscape of what they need. That was a big inflection point for us, and that was honestly super hard, because that's the thing that pulled us out from things that we understood to things that we didn't understand. We have a great product manager who has been in the enterprise business, like, working at this level most of his career. But most of us are like, we do startups, we like building web pages, the internet is fun. So for a lot of us, that was a pretty significant shift.
was
And go ahead.
was that a get off the ship moment for some people, like if they realize this isn't fun and not for me?
No, not really. I think, there's always there are always points in time where people want to get off the ship for a lot of different reasons. And of course, like the great resignation, we're seeing that now as everybody's had the opportunity to sit at home for 18 months and think deeply about what they want for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we haven't, I think there's so much kind of esprit de corps in these really hard moments. There's so much pride in the teamwork. There's so much pride in the grind that even if it's kind of a different mode that we're working in, people still want to stick together and do it.
Well, how was that culture instilled, and how do you talk about it? Have seen it emerge
Mhm.
with newer employees, or those on your team who might be struggling with, like, I couldn't care less about enterprise compliance as to certification, which I think I just mangled. But I know it's my job and I have to get it done. That doesn't sound. I'm an unmotivated employee. So how do you talk about it to get my head in the right place?
There are some folks who are super motivated by this.
Sure.
Like they love it. They are complicated technical problems. They deal with very strict specifications, and that can be a really kind of engaging kind of development to do. If you're a product manager, there's a lot of interesting stuff to dig into. So it's not really about like, you hate this work and we're gonna make you love it. It's more about like, let's find the folks who love this work and let them do that. And like we have so many different things to build that suit so many, different kinds of people's interests, that we just need to figure out like we have smart people, where do we put them so that they love what they do?
Got it. I mean, I guess it's less about like, is the work fun, or that wasn't
Mhm.
really what it meant to focus on so much as it seems like it really must have changed the culture of the company, at least it's just like what you feel like, what was driving people to get up and come to work in the
Mhm.
first 4 or 5 years is going to be different than in the last 5 years. I would have to imagine, and that shift, like, is that just one that people came along for the ride for, is like whatever's needed, it will, happy to do, or is where there moments and like we need to start talking about the company and its
Mhm.
strategy in a different way?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that's kind of happened over the last year and a half is people just in general, there's been a big concern about like our company culture.
Right.
Um, you know,
Overall.
yeah, overall. And I was doing a lot of kind of future of work, remote work things earlier in the pandemic, and that always came up as a topic, which is how do you preserve your company culture? And the place that I've landed on that is that company culture is immutable for as long as people want it to be that way. So much of a company culture is how we work together, what we value, how we treat one another, and what we value, like what we find to be important.
Hmm.
And that has been a very consistent thread throughout Slack. And I think a lot of that culture is pretty baked in after a company has existed for 6 months. Like the folks you have co-founding the company and leading the company set the tone for the company. And then it's just kind of set in stone unless you do a massive, massive, massive reset very deliberately. Um, so Yes, our focus as a company has changed, our customer base has changed, like, the things that we need to do to grow as a business have changed, but who we are at our core is still pretty much the same. Um, it's, our culture is still very distinct and recognizable, and people stick around because they love the environment, even as kind of the mission and the vision have transformed and kind of suffused industries, verticals, company sizes, regulatory, standards, like whatever it is, the culture has been steady enough that people remain.
We talked so much about the history of Slack and your role as a leader in the company, that very little about what you do day to day, and I won't try to fit it all in the time we have, but I know you oversee customer experience, correct?
I'm a little bit split brained. So, customer experience, when Slack started and we started getting customers, they needed support. And it was like our CEO and, 6 engineers and me, also kind of an engineer. And so I just raised my hand and said, like, well, customer support, I can run that for a little bit. And then I owned it for 8 years. Um, so that still reports up into me. Amazing team runs that now. I've since turned my focus to our core product.
Mhm.
So now I oversee part of the product organization, and it's what you think of when you think of Slack. So messages, files, emoji, notifications, layout, apps, all that stuff. So now I spend my days mostly thinking about the experiences we build for people, and really like, are we helping you or hurting you? Like, are we helping you be productive? Do you have everything you need? If not, how can we give that to you? And how can we give that to you without making our product, you know, less approachable, harder to use, more complex, more confusing? How do we, to the best of our ability, become the pane of glass through which you see your work, rather than like Slack, the product you use all day? Like, nobody gets hired to be a senior Slack user. That's nobody's job. Like, you have like reporters, and I'm sure you have like graphic designers and stuff, but you didn't put out a job posting for like a senior Slack user.
I've occasionally thought about it. I think at a certain scale company, it would be worth having like someone in charge of internal communications, just like, treating Slack like a small city. But yes, fair enough.
Yeah, so that's really where I spend my time, is thinking about how does our product, like, it's kind of a scary responsibility, honestly. Um, like, millions and millions of people spend a lot of time on our product, and this is the window through which they see their work. Um, so I take that pretty seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that customer experience, or other places like support or
Mhm,
customer success, et cetera, it sits within the product team now,
mhm,
maybe by dint of your history. But that, I know it's done a lot of different ways, different companies, but that strikes me as a good way to maintain that connection with
mhm.
the human users on the other end, which has got to be just so much harder at the scale you're operating in now, because first of all, so many different types of
Mhm.
humans solving for, but also just it's not, you could try to picture one, but it's not.
Yeah.
um
We've had to build increasingly, like, robust systems to capture customer feedback and incorporate into the product process. It's pretty easy when 10 people, when you have, like, 10 pieces of important feedback one day. It's much harder when you have 1,000,
mhm.
but it's super important. We haven't just said, like, "Too hard to aggregate it, whatever, ignoring it." No, like, we continue to invest in, like, whole teams to help us understand what our customers are saying and pull it in.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that. On As a very heavy Slack user, is dependent on a lot of that feedback, as well as someone who cares about the humanity of business. So,
Thank you.
adding appreciate on both those fronts. And thank you so much, Ali, for coming on and sharing that story. I'm sure it's been a crazy decade, and we'll have you on in 10 years hence to talk about all the pivots from the 2020 decade.
I will have so much more gray hair by then. It'll be great.
Me too. Me too. Well, thank you so much. I really
Yeah, thank
appreciate it.
you.
Have a good one. That's it for Make Business Better today. I'm Zach Seward. We'll be here again in 2 weeks and every other Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time thereafter here on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you want to get the live stream. And of course, you can always watch the episodes after on all of those platforms as well. Just follow us on any of those to be notified when we go live. Thanks so much for joining. I hope you all have a great day.